Hi, I'm Katie.
And I'm Toby, and we are High Country Women.
Today we're going to walk you through how to make the Esther skirt. We set out to design what we hope is the perfect summer linen set, and I think we did it.
It's the perfect summer linen set.
So we're really excited about this skirt. It was the inspiration behind the outfit. We love it as a set, and we also really love it standalone.
Mm-hmm. And I think a couple of our favorite parts about the skirt is the front. It looks fitted, it has a button placket, and it's super flattering because the first ruffle starts kind of right at your hips. But the back has an elastic waistband, and so it's super comfortable. It's a pull-on skirt. You can wear it all day long.
It's great.
Yeah.
This pattern also includes an optional lining. Today we won't be needing a lining with the skirt that we're making, but I will make sure to mention the times when actually you would be using the lining pattern pieces as well. And a few other things you'll need before we get started. We'll need some interfacing for the waistband and the button placket. 4 buttons, maybe like a 3/8 to 5/8 inch button, and then also some 1.5 inch elastic for the back waistband.
In your pattern folder, you will find 3 different options for printing out the pattern. So the first one, and probably the most common, is printing at home on a regular printer or at the library or whatever, on regular paper, printing out all of the pieces and then laying them out. And in our pattern instructions, we do have a layout guide, so you can use that, and you'll lay them out, tape them all together before you actually start cutting out the pattern pieces. The second option is sending it into a local print shop and printing on large format paper. So that's an easy option. You do have to pay a small fee per page for that, but it's as easy as sending in the file to the print shop and they get it done for you. And you still have to cut the pieces out, but you don't have to tape anything together. And then the last option is if you are lucky enough to have a projector in your sewing space, then you can just use a projector to project onto your fabric and cut it out that way. And so once you have all of your pattern pieces ready, we're ready to get started. Let's do it. We recommend laying out all of your pattern pieces before you begin cutting to make sure they will all fit. We have fabric cutting layouts in our instructions as a guide. A few things to note before you begin cutting. Every pattern piece has an arrow. Those arrows should be in the direction of the grain line, which runs parallel to the selvage edge. The waistband pattern pieces have 2 arrows, showing that they can be aligned in either direction. If a pattern piece says to cut on fold, it will have an arrow pointing to the folded edge. You'll want to lay the pattern piece on the fold and not cut that side. When cutting, you want to make sure your pattern piece stays in place. You can either pin the pieces down or use pattern weights. Many of the pattern pieces have black triangles, which indicate notches. Be sure to cut into those notches when you're cutting out your pattern pieces, no more than 1/4 inch. On the folded edges, you'll want to notch your center, denoted by the small black triangles. Cut the corner triangle off. The waistband pieces both have a dotted line going across the center. This indicates where your waistline will be folded in half. Now that you have all your pattern pieces cut out, we're ready to dive into the first step of the instructions. Step number 1 is to grab your front waistband pieces and fold them in half, long ways, wrong sides together. Iron and then open back up, wrong sides facing up. Step number 2 is to iron your interfacing pieces, rough sides down, to the wrong side of your front waistband pieces. They should be positioned just barely below the fold line and 3/8 inch from one side. For step number 3, grab your 2 front yokes. Iron the other 2 interfacing pieces, rough sides down, to the wrong side of your yoke pieces. They should be positioned between the 2 notches, centered from the top and bottom. Moving on to step number 4, but if you're lining your skirt, you'll skip to step number 6. You can still follow along here and we'll just briefly mention the differences. So first, we'll fold the placket towards the wrong side at the first notch. Press that, fold again at the second notch and press. If you're using a lining, you'll layer that piece on top here. Once you've folded the placket twice, you'll edge stitch here. If you're using a lining, make sure that the lining piece is caught in the edge stitching. Step number 5, we're going to sew yoke fronts to yoke back, right sides together. If you're lining your skirt, you'll layer the back yoke with back yoke lining before stitching. Finish seam allowance with either a serger or a zigzag stitch. If you're doing a zigzag stitch, set your machine to a length of 2.5 and a width of 4. Iron seam allowance towards the back yoke. For step number 10, we're moving on to the main skirt. With the right sides together, stitch the side seams of the main skirt pieces together. Finish seam allowance with either a serger or zigzag stitch. Pick one side to be the back of your skirt, then iron seam allowance towards the back. For step number 11, we're going to baste from side seam to side seam in both the front and back. Set your machine stitch setting length to a 4. Start your basting stitch on one side of the skirt side seam and sew to the other side using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you're unfamiliar with basting stitches, they are long stitches sewn in without back stitching. For this purpose, we're going to use basting sewn along the edge of the fabric that will be gathered, creating a thread that can be pulled to create gathers. In step number 12, we're going to begin gathering. Turn your garment right side out. Pull the bobbin thread to begin gathering the fabric. We find it easy to gather from both sides and meet in the middle, then flip the skirt and do the same on the other side. Do this until you've gathered the skirt to match the width of the yoke since they will be sewn together. Then spread the gathers so they are evenly distributed. For step number 13, line up the main skirt to the yoke, right sides together, matching the side seams and front and back centers. Adjust the gathers to fit into those spaces. The left panel should overlap the right panel. Pin in place. If you have a lining, read through steps 14 and 15 where you insert the lining skirt on the inside of these 2 layers. Otherwise, we'll move on to step 16. Make sure your stitch length is set back to what it was. 2.5 is typical. Sew around the entire circle at 5/8 inch seam allowance. That should be outside of your basting stitches so they aren't visible on the outside of the skirt. Iron the seam allowance up towards the yoke. This next part is optional, but we think it gives it a nice look. Top stitch along the lower edge of the yoke, catching the seam allowance underneath. This is what it looks like. For step 18, we're moving on to the ruffle hem. With right sides together, stitch the front ruffle hem to the back ruffle hem. Choose one side to be the back, then iron the seam allowance towards the back. In step 19, we're going to baste the top edges just like we did with the main skirt. Remember to set your stitch length to a 4 and use a seam allowance of a 1/4 inch. Pull the bobbin threads to gather the fabric until you've gathered the ruffle to match the width of the bottom of the main skirt since they will be sewn together. Then spread the gathers so that they are evenly distributed. Step 20. Line up the ruffle hem to the main skirt right sides together, matching the side seams and front and back centers. Adjust gathers to fit into those spaces. Make sure your stitch length is set back to what it was, about 2.5. Stitch at 5/8 inch seam allowance. Finish with a serger or zigzag stitch. Iron seam allowance down towards the ruffle hem. Now we're going to move on to the waistband in step 21. With right sides together, interfacing on the bottom half and the wider margins in the center, stitch the front waistband pieces to the back waistband. Finish edges and iron seam allowances towards the back. Step 22. Open up and iron the entire waistband in half, long ways, wrong sides together. Then iron the edge opposite the interfacing in 3/8 inch. In step 23, we'll attach the edge without the 3/8 inch fold to the yoke, right sides together, matching and pinning first the center back notches and then the side seams. Pin in between. For step 24, wrap the waistband around the front of the skirt and pin. It should be longer than your yoke, overhanging by about 1/2 inch. Sew waistband to yoke and finish edges. From inside of the skirt, iron seam allowance up towards the waistband. Step 25. To finish the waistband opening, fold the ends right side together and stitch right along the edge, lining up with the button placket. Trim excess fabric. Turn the corner out and repeat for the other side. In step 26, fold the rest of the waistband over. Pin from the outside in the ditch, making sure that you catch the bottom edge of the waistband on the inside. If you want to add a tag to the back of the skirt, now is the time. Stitch in the ditch from side seam to side seam on the right side of the fabric. Step 27. Attach a safety pin to the end of your elastic and begin inserting it into the waistband from one side. Once the end of the elastic reaches the side seam, pin it, then stitch in the ditch of the side seam from the outside of the skirt to keep it in place. Now it's time to try your skirt on. For step number 28, pin the button placket as if it were closed with buttons and try your skirt on. Pull the elastic through the unstitched side, smoothing out the bunching in the material as you go. Once the skirt fits comfortably, pin the elastic in place. Stitch in the ditch to keep the elastic in place, then cut off the excess. For step number 29, finish stitching the front waistband down. Pin carefully from the outside in the ditch, making sure that you catch the bottom edge of the waistband on the inside. Stitch in the ditch, back tacking at either end. Now we're moving on to the buttonholes in step number 30. Mark the center of your waistband about 1/4 inch from the edge of the placket. Next, mark where you want your lowest buttonhole. We recommend laying your buttons out to visualize placement. Measure the distance between the top and bottom marks. Divide that by 3. From bottom buttonhole, measure up that distance for a second buttonhole and again for a third. Many sewing machines have buttonhole settings and come with a buttonhole foot. If it's your first time sewing buttonholes, check out your machine's user manual or look up best practices for using these settings on your machine. Give it a couple of practice attempts on scrap material before creating buttonholes on your skirt. Use a seam ripper to carefully open the buttonhole, then make sure the hole fits the size of the button that you'll be using. Once you've added the buttonholes, it's time to add the buttons in step number 31. We like to line up the button plackets and make markings with chalk through the buttonholes so we know where to sew the buttons on. We recommend hand sewing your buttons onto your skirt. First, make a knot in the end of your thread. Bring your needle up from underneath your waistband through one of the holes in your button. Stick your needle through the hole in the opposite corner, ensuring that your button is positioned well. Continue this pattern, making 8 to 10 passes on each arm of your X and ending on the inside of your waistband. Next, poke your needle through your waistband but under your button and pull through. Wind your thread around the button 3 times. Poke your needle back through your waistband underneath the button, then tie a knot in your thread. And the final step, hemming your skirt. Roll the hem 3/8 inch and press, then 3/8 inch again. Press and pin in place. Stitch close to the folded edge. And you're done! Congratulations!